All right. By the way, do you have a presentation or PowerPoint? No, right?
No, I'll just be speaking.
Okay, very good. Okay, Comrade. So let's proceed. Welcome all of you to Marx School, another session of Marx School, Sri Lanka. And we welcome as the Marx School all of you to Marx School Sri Lanka. As you all know, Marx School is a political platform established to explore contemporary issues under capitalism through a Marxist perspective and to revisit some of the fundamental theoretical issues of Marxist theory. Uh, so we were doing this for at least last 3 years, and we continue with respect to the recent tendencies, issues, and some of the key political issues in the world, and especially in South Asia and Sri Lanka. We consider that a comprehensive theoretical struggle must be waged, sharpened, and organized today against bourgeois pseudosciences and some of the postmodern tendencies that serve to legitimize bourgeois order and status quo. We invite Marxist scholars around the world and also comrades who are dedicated their entire lives to class struggle and building up revolutionary movements and parties to face capitalist, nationalist, fascist, and other forms of reactionary currents across the world. So today we invited Comrade Maya John, who's not a stranger to Marx School at all, to share her thoughts on the recent uprisings, youth uprisings across South Asia. So today Maya will speak on the topic of the Cockroach movement and the Gen Z upheavals, South Asia as an epicenter of revolutionary youth politics, a big question mark. If I give a very brief introduction to today's speaker, Comrade Maya John. Maya John is an assistant professor in Department of History, Delhi University. She has published widely on the evolution of labor law in colonial India, the relationship between caste and the labor market, the blind spots in mainstream epidemiology, and disease surveillance, the question of educational access in colonial and post-colonial India, the challenges faced by unrecognized workers in contemporary times, and problems with the current labor law regimes, especially in the Indian context. Her other areas of interest include social movements, caste and the history of reservation, dynamics of women's participation in the colonial and post-colonial labor market, trends in the women's movement, and state formation in contemporary India. She has been teaching modern European history, early colonial history of India, contemporary history of India, gender history of the Indian subcontinent. And for us as Sri Lankans and all the Sri Lankan comrades, we can recall that she uh, published widely during 2022 Aragalaya in Sri Lanka, and her articles and speeches were widely published, shared, and translated into Sinhala and ignited a lot of discussion and debate in the Sri Lankan context as well. So today she will share her thoughts on the above mentioned topic, and she will speak for 40 to 45 minutes, and then the question and answer session will be followed. So without further ado, I invite Comrade Maya to proceed with the session today. Thank you very much.
I thank Kalpa and all comrades in the Marx Club for inviting me and facilitating, this discussion on the recent, rebellions, upheavals that we've been seeing in South Asia, with a significant, participation of young people. I would, of course, say it out right in the beginning that my purpose here today is not to, slide into a celebratory, a tenor about this so-called cockroach movement, which recently, emerged in my country. but I will definitely be taking a critical tone and tenor. And it's an assessment that is also a shared one, and it's cutting across South Asia, where we've seen similar potential and then lost opportunity. Um, um, I would say that of course, where I'm coming from right now, the kind of heated, discussions and deliberations that are happening, lots being written, I can see that many, are seeing the recent uprising, the so-called cockroach movement, as some kind of a respite, from the tyranny of the BJP RSS rule, which has, been a little bit more than a decade now in India. And I also see that there are, of course, people who are also, not convinced about this, and they are thinking that there has literally been no change, with the kind of ouster removal of the Bharatiya Janata Party BJP education minister around, who was at the center of the storm. Um, Now, I would say, therefore, that examining the logic and the flow of events, the problems, the prospects, of this particular movement and several other movements in recent times, makes it literally, imperative for struggling people of South Asia and beyond, for all those working and desirous for revolutionary change, to honestly review the situation and chart out plans to move forward. And it's really from that, perspective that I'm sharing, what exactly one saw unfolding here with respect to the so-called cockroach movement. But I just start with saying that the year 2026, and in fact, even before 2026, India has witnessed phenomenal struggles of ordinary people, which is why many of us activists found it absolutely ridiculous when self-proclaimed, self-imposed leaders of the Cockroach Janata Party, even went on, to say that this country has been asleep for 10, 12 years, and the Cockroach Janata Party, has brought the people out, the youth out on the street. All lies. Our country has seen a massive farmers movement. India has also seen various spirited struggles of Adivasi communities. We have, since the beginning of 2026, seen several autonomous workers' strikes in key industrial areas, and also informal sector workers like domestic workers. So not just the conventional industrial belt, but even other sectors have seen huge labor unrest. And we have also been witnessing, very importantly, very crucial struggles of young, government school students and youth over the crumbling state of education in India and the rising unemployment. And this is all well before the so-called cockroach movement grabbed the limelight. Now, of course, there is something that one sees in terms of a commonality between, what has unfolded here in the past month or so, and other, movements in South Asia, where, we see that a lot of the recent mobilizations have been identified, have been generally seen as leaderless, partyless, and they have consequently, interestingly, when you look closely, these mobilizations have attracted and galvanized, very, very disparate social segments. And some of these social segments are actually antagonistically positioned vis-a-vis each other. So I would say that, these movements, at the one level, they have had the potential to shock the system, and they have, even in some cases, like in Sri Lanka, they have even, dislodged the dispensation, similarly in, Nepal. But sadly, time and time, again, these movements have collapsed under the weight of their own marked, internal contradictions, and also due to the lack of revolutionary vision amongst its stakeholders for systematic change. So I'd say that the lack of a coherent vision, a coherent agenda of the laboring masses that mobilize, that take in these upheavals of recent times, has led to the active sidelining, marginalizing of their concrete issues, and the consequent dismissal of a much needed alternative paradigm of revolutionary politics. So this of course means that all of us, we need to introspect, therefore, very, very closely on the uncritical deployment of the term Gen Z and Gen Z upheavals. True, to some extent, it enables to categorize a sizable section of young people who have aspirations for their future and are visibly restless about attaining them. But really, apart from the age issue and apart from the aspirations for a secure future, does a homogeneous youth exist? Did it exist in Nepal? Did it exist in Sri Lanka? Did it exist in Bangladesh? Did it exist in Pakistan? Does it exist in India? No. So really, it is imperative to recognize the deepening class divisions within the youth that have shown a certain restlessness in recent times, and it's very, very crucial to bring back class into our discussion on agenda and strategies for the movement. More so, it's important to do this, given that it is precisely class divisions that further complicate historically inherited and acquired inequalities, be it along the lines of caste, community, region, and so on. So yes, the concept, the idea Gen Z actually, conceals more than it reveals, because it dangerously flattens the different class positions within the youth. And just to quickly elucidate, I mean, can we at all equate, a government school student who doesn't have a teacher in class who can teach, who doesn't have a desk to sit at, who doesn't have a ceiling fan, right, above his or her head, and whose family income is, less than 10,000 rupees per month, and, a private school student who's studying in one of the top-notch, private schools, paying through their nose for, the fees, and who comes literally from a family whose income amounts anywhere between 1 lakh to 5 lakh per month. Obviously, we can't equate, we can't conflate. Clearly, then, the concrete circumstances and the discontent of both these sections, the middle class within the Gen Z and the working class, the subaltern section of the Gen Z are not something that we can conflate or treat as equivalent. Their demands are distinctively different, which means that when we examine the recent so-called cockroach movement, we definitely look for the contradictions that have actively played out. We identify the marginalization of the demands that actually appealed to the vast majority, which actually mobilized them. The demands, of people who in real terms hadn't come out in protest merely against paper leaks, exam paper leaks, but instead were fighting for a radical change in the country's education system. So in other words, far from, I would say, facilitating and strengthening people's cockroach movement, we really see on the ground how a section of tech savvy, digitally endowed middle class Gen Z, just use their enhanced visibility, on digital platforms to literally hijack, a larger people's movement. And many of these self-proclaimed leaders of quote unquote cockroaches were actually, continuously articulating demands. They were adopting a strategy that, marginalized the demands, the articulations, the autonomy of the vast majority of subaltern youth who were getting mobilized. And in fact, we see a very consistent effort of the Cockroach Janta Party to continually rein in, restrain the autonomy of the movement as people, were joining and stepping forward and bringing their own energy and issues to the movement. And we see similarly this kind of situation happened in Nepal also last year. When the middle class Gen Z retreated into their sitting rooms and drawing rooms, that's precisely when we saw the subaltern Nepali youth in pitched battle with the police, and that come from neighboring parts of the cities of Kathmandu, etc., or they were already laboring as informal workers, poorly paid workers in these cities, and they really were pushing their agenda, and that is really what gave a radical turn to a movement that was otherwise just talking about corruption in a very middle class lens. Now, importantly, the pathetic condition of education in India, has already, triggered many vibrant movements led by student and youth organizations, which are left student and youth organizations. And I'm focusing on this a little bit more because I want to be able to show that there's already some momentum. There's already a certain effort and leadership, and in contrast to that, you see these self-appointed leaders of the Cockroach Janta Party. So literally the CJP, or the Cockroach Janta Party, was grafting itself on an already existing movement with respect to the country's educational crisis. And of course, when they did so, they were also restricting the movement. They were trying to tame it and make it focused only on very, very specific middle class demand and agenda. So I would like to spend a few minutes just highlighting what I think has facilitated these fly by night leaders or upstarts. Nobody knew them a few years back, to gain an advantage over existing struggles, initiatives of grassroots organizations, including those of the left. And for this, I would draw attention of everyone to the typical nature of these middle class leaders, on the forefront of these quote unquote Gen Z upheavals, and they're linked to what I would call a very well-oiled machinery of NGOs, including international NGOs. Most of these middle class quote leaders have literally hardly any involvement in people's struggle before they were catapulted into the limelight. And I feel that it's very, very important for us to unpack their identity, their politics, and whose interests do they really represent. Often drawn from funded leadership training programs, including foreign investment in these kind of leadership programs, and promoted through dubious awards for leadership, or what is now known as awards for social entrepreneurship, and literally catapulting to prominence due to corporate media houses and social media houses picking up their case stories. These these figures, these upstarts, are really part of what I would say a concerted effort of India's elites and international capitalists lobbies to blunt the possibilities of radical politics and its consolidation in the country. So typically these handpicked people who then very quickly become the face of many Gen Z uprisings, who claim themselves to be leaders. These persons don't represent an agenda and program to restructure the social and economic conditions of the majority who are getting mobilized. And neither do they, have any commitment to make the ruling establishment more accessible, accountable, and participatory for the common people. And I think in the context of what just happened, in terms of the quote unquote cockroach movement, Sonam Wangchuk, who was helicoptered into this movement, was parachuted onto it into Jantar Mantar, and suddenly overnight declared his hunger strike, is an excellent case in point. And I'll of course return to this, issue of the hunger strike a little later. But I want us to keep this in mind in terms of, who these people are who have got, pushed into the limelight. And I also want to draw attention to the way the typical middle class approach in their understanding of the state, right? The Indian state, in terms of the demands to push for, whose demands get prioritized by these so-called leaders, right? So I think all these are very important parameters around which we need to unpack what happened in the so-called Cockroach Janta movement, and similarly, in the last few years, what's happened in other quote-unquote Gen Z upheavals. Now let me proceed to highlight the sudden emergence of where did this all start from? How did CJP get created, Cockroach Janta Party? Notably drawing on their social networks and also their prior experience of actively managing campaigns and social media handles of bourgeois political parties. It was pretty easy for these self-appointed leaders of the quote unquote movement to launch and make this satirical online platform that they called Cockroach Janta Party. Now, the lack of responsive governance is really what was the context in which they were able to succeed in making this entire initiative of theirs, this meme that they had made that yes, we are cockroaches, go viral. And that's because common people have been reeling under so much in this past decade. They've been reeling under rising costs of living, insecurity for their future, rampant corruption, and so on. And seeking visibility so as to gain political mileage. The CJP quote unquote leaders really lost no time in this fertile, background to rapidly mobilize, algorithmic generated, AI generated content from recent, months to create this buzz effect, and that's really how you can explain their entry into the picture. Now, significantly, most of these CJP quote unquote leaders are linked to the notorious Aam Aadmi Party, the AAP, which was, in control of the Delhi government till 2025, last year. And the face of the Cockroach Janta Party right now, a figure known as Abhijit Tipke, was actually managing the IT wing of the Aam Aadmi Party as late as 2023. And he was pivotal in propagating the Aam Aadmi Party's very, very misleading campaign of having overhauled, Delhi's government schools while in power, which is absolutely not true, false propaganda. Because the Aam Aadmi Party literally, when in power in Delhi, continued with a prevailing practice of governments in the past to handpick a few government schools for upgradation, flushing them with more funds, better teachers, etc. And the average neighborhood government schools, which are known as, the Sarvodaya Vidyalayas, continue to be starved of funds, teachers, infrastructure, etc. And we also find that this government actually, to show that it was, doing a better job in terms of performance, they actually were trying to cover up the very high dropout rate of children starting from the upper primary classes, class 8 onwards, right? So that they could, they could show better results in class 10th, right? So they were doing all these things. They were actually weeding out children who were underperformers so that, the government schools in Delhi's class 10th or higher secondary results would be better, would be showcased as better. So all this, things were done. And the K was very much part of that regime. So I would say that, just because, and I reiterate, just because some people who have worked, in the propaganda machinery of bourgeois parties and are good in the digital world in making something viral, really does not mean that they understand the contours and nature of the state and can lead or are capable of leading, street mass politics. And this was very, very evident as, the days progressed, and especially around, July 18th to July 24th. I would say that, in many ways, the Cockroach Janata Party's visibility and politics of optics, have literally served as a substitute for any long-term grassroots organizational work and credibility. And they've simply used, their social media acumen to catapult themselves into, the limelight. And particularly and this has been very strategically done, because this is their constituency. This is the section that they want to consolidate, right? Which is, young people appearing for the medical entrance exam, the NEET, NEET, right? So they really, went hammer and tong, really reducing the momentum and issues to the single point agenda of the NEET paper leak, right? And pressing forth with this one specific demand, the resignation of the Union Education Minister from BJP, that's, Dharmendra Pradhan. Of course, uh, um, um, the selective focus, on this particular exam, the selective focus on Dharmendra Pradhan, is not coincidental. It was very, very carefully weighed by the CJP leadership. And it's very, very troubling that despite the massive pressure from below to widen the horizon of the movement, I mean, you have to remember that people are reeling under things like, 94,000, almost a lakh government schools closing down in the last 10 years in India. So people are coming from there. I mean, that's the kind of discontent when they can't even finish their schooling. It's a fight to get enrolled in, a neighboring government school because there's such large numbers and there are not enough government schools. So that's where people are coming from, right? And here is this, section of middle class leaders who are just talking about this one exam, who a large number of, working class youth, subaltern youth can't even dream of giving that exam, the admission test for the medical course, the NEET. So I would say that, definitely the very restrictive focus of, the CJP quote unquote leaders had little signaling effect for the subaltern section that was getting mobilized. And, literally the partisan, intention of the CJP leaders to consolidate, a support base within a very select section of middle class youth, some 22 lakh students who invest in this admission medical entrance test, the NEET. This was really their priority, not the mass of subaltern and working class youth who are just completely crushed by a crumbling education system. Now, of course, what we see is that under the influence of left organizations that were very much there in the thick of things, there was a continuous tussle, right? And there was a significant radicalization of demands. And that is why precisely, the CJP became increasingly day by day more dictatorial, right, and undemocratic in its functioning. Which is why they, in competing with the more radical, tendencies and demands, and the fact that the media was also talking to left organizations, you saw the CJP, increasingly roll out the red carpet to all kinds of, dubious people and faces, right? Dynastic politicians, coaching center mafia, okay, regressive, upper caste, dominant caste, organizations known as the CAP, right, in rural India, CAP leaders, being brought on stage, and all kinds of celebrities with, actually no connection, no commitment to a people's, what I'd call a people's cockroach movement, were, given the dais, etc., and space. And everybody else was just supposed to be a cheering, clapping, uncritical mass crowd for these people who were being parachuted onto the dais. So of course, Sonam Wangchuk being brought in on June 28th to the protest sit-in is very much part of that CJP plan of wanting to rein in things, to keep the agenda focused on, a more middle class agenda. And really, Sonam Wangchuk undemocratically declaring his hunger strike was, nothing else but intended to rein in the radical potential of the movement. Correspondingly, mass mobilization and the expansion of the protest, right, was subordinated by this hunger strike. Particularly, this is a hunger strike by a personality whose demigod-like status has literally been created by, imperialist funding agencies and promoters, and whose, larger political and ideological track record is suspect, to say the least. We can come back to this if anybody has any particular questions on Wangchuk. But what I'd say is that the strategy, what I'd say is that, Sonam Wangchuk is actually someone, I just quickly say, someone who has been very much part of an ecosystem. Both he and his partner, Gitanjali Angmo, very part of an ecosystem where, there has been a lot of actually lobbying for. They've actually lobbied Wangchuk and Gitanjali Angmo for, the kind of education policy that ruling governments have wanted, which is more or less along the line of, commercial education and neglecting the educational needs of the larger masses. So I'd say that, the strategy of the hunger strike, particularly by someone like Wangchuk, really ate into the collective agency and participation of people, who were getting mobilized, who were talking, who were engaging, and things got increasingly, reduced because you see, when someone goes on a hunger strike, right, it indicates that no other means of agitation or struggle is possible, which is ridiculous. People are ready to fight. They're getting mobilized, not just in Delhi, but in other parts of, the country, and you decide on this strategy, right? So you're limiting the scope, the potential of people who are willing to fight, right? Now, they're just supposed to come and watch Wangchuk's ailing health. And so literally it became more about the person on hunger strike than about the issues on which the hunger strike was supposed to be fought, of course, Wangchuk's forceful removal from the protest site on July 18th, really had the protesters very rallied up because of, as I keep saying, this larger massive discontent that people had. So despite his dubious credentials, even someone like Wangchuk was able to, gain a certain kind of, support from struggling people, though he doesn't have their interests in mind. So essentially, the CJP, actually indulged in what many of us who were closely watching them, who were debating with them, actually, indulging in gatekeeping, restricting the struggling masses to Jantar Mantar in Delhi, right? Which was absolutely a very, very unfortunate thing that happened. given the very widespread, educational crisis in the country. And really, this gatekeeping was something that even suited the ruling dispensation, which was very wary of, the possible spread of momentum beyond central Delhi, where Jantar Mantar is, where the protest sit-in was. I would just like to spend now just a few minutes giving you some kind of a basic, narrative of how things started and how CJP started and how you can see its activities and strategies. Let me spend a little time more specifically on, how, a middle class of, body, entity, force like the CJP, how can you see, understand better its compromise, particularly on the question of education, it is really no coincidence. I feel that it's no coincidence that it cannot be entrusted with ideological leadership of a movement that is seeking change, radical change in the country's education system, and is seeking accountability from the ruling BJP RSS regime. And I say this because, you can see so many, ideological inconsistencies, bankruptcies in the CJP, just like I mentioned, them opening up the protest space, right, to these dubious forces, money minting private coaching institutes, and others, all of whom, and very dubious politicians, all of whom actually reflect the poor state of education in the country. I mean, some of the politicians they invited, including their own mentor, the Cockroach Janata Party's many members, I said, belonged earlier to the Aam Aadmi Party. And the leader of the Aam Aadmi Party, Arvind Kejriwal, was also invited. And, as I just explained, where do these politicians come from? They're coming from bourgeois parties that have actually, destroyed or partaken in the destruction of equal public funded education. So I'd say that, there's that, in addition to the fact that, they actually, because of pressure from left organizations, were also having to be more specific, right, about what are they demanding. And especially this critique was coming that only one minister's removal is not going to change anything, right? So see that they, articulate certain kind of demands, right, what they call education reforms. And what are these typically? And typically these demands, these visions of the Cockroach Janata Party have been just recently, 2 days back, reiterated because they regrouped, all the CJP leaders regrouped in Abhijit Tipke's home in Maharashtra. And in the press conference they gave shortly later, all this is very evident. What are the articulations? Their vision is limited to what they keep calling affordable education. Okay, contrast this to what radical left was, arguing in the same space, same time, which was equal education from kindergarten to post-graduation, a common school, right? That means there's only one school. There's no divide between a private school and a government school. Because if you're thinking in terms of the CJP's model of affordable education, they're obviously still stuck to the idea of a private public school division in which private schools need to be regulated and made more affordable, right? So that's where it's coming from. So essentially, it's a set of demands asking for regulation of the private sector, right? But not the doing away with the private sector, which should actually be a domain of a public good, an affordable public good. And of course, for a very large section, even if public schools or public colleges were made affordable through some kind of regulation, they would still never be able to. The poor would still never be able to aspire for those institutions. They just don't have that kind of capital. Similarly, while the left was at the same time, same space, arguing for regulation of coaching centers, right? And sorry, not, I got that wrong. While the left in the same space, same time, was pushing for the abolishment of coaching centers, you see the Cockroach Janata Party, dilute that and, press for regulation of coaching centers, right? So irony of ironies, So you don't even want to recognize that coaching centers themselves are a problem. And unless you do away with them, you will not do away with the parallel shadow education system that is running, right? We also found that, as left organizations continued to, try and, lead the movement, wrest it away from these CJP leadership, we find that, they were heckled. Left activists are very often heckled at the protest site, and even trolled, online, for articulating radical demands. And it was actually very frustrating to be honest. All the hard work of, creatively, in a focused manner, effectively bring out, the more radical demands like common schooling, equal education, right? We find that all those, initiatives, campaigns, and articulation very conveniently given a CJP label, that these were initiatives of the Cockroach Janta Party today at Jantar Mantar did this, So very interesting, just co-option of what were otherwise independent on autonomous left interventions. And this is because, again, this section of tech savvy, digitally endowed middle class in the know how to use this technology to do this, to take away the attention from issues, to take away the limelight from those who are actually organizing the masses. I would quickly now spend just a few minutes on the march to Parliament and what that fateful day on, the July 20th actually, revealed. Now, put very simply, I think this is a unspoken, rule. When a movement, a campaign needs to regroup, right, and review, it's a strategy that usually, there is a march to Parliament, which is somewhere seen as a point of closure, temporary closure. And this was really what, even the CJP leaders had planned when they announced on 9th of July that on the 20th of July, they're going to have this march to Parliament, right? It was also, of course, strategically the first day of the monsoon session, the Parliament. So, of course, with an intention to then, withdraw after the 20th, we see this grand call made. But remember, these are people, as I said earlier, also have no experience in leading street mass politics, right? And they don't even have a commitment towards it. So we saw massive mismanagement, starting from the night of 19th July, and of course into 20th July, the actual day of the march. Abhijit Dipke actually himself created a roadblock by opting for a truck on which he and his supporters, got on, and also by creating a huge amount of confusion by suddenly calling off the rally in the early afternoon. And this is when people had already reached, either they'd reached Jantar Mantar, the protest site, or they were there nearby and having tussles with the police. Now that protest site, mind you, can only accommodate 3,000 to 4,000 people. Dipke opting for a truck which could barely move and whose tires were quickly punctured by the police meant that he was conveniently encircled and was not leading people on foot from the front. So all this reflects, where these people are coming from, and really that they have no anchorage, in movements, right, and what they need, a reading of the situation. They were so dependent on the internet, which the police jammed. They hadn't built any backup communication network. So protesters were really left in the lurch, no proper signal. And the worst is that people were being beaten up, brutalized by the police on July 20th. And the spokespersons of Cockroach Janta Party are in talks with the BJP. And they were getting constant news of the massive, crackdown, and they didn't walk out of the talks, and everyone, CJP and some other organization, everyone had exited by the evening of July 20th. The protesters in many ways were left in the lurch. There were, of course, some left organizations that stayed back. I think some of them are here today in the meeting also. They've joined us. And they tried to, galvanize the protesters And very importantly, the police had dismantled the protest site by the afternoon of July 20th, galvanizing protesters. Some of the left organizations went back to reclaim the space. So I keep saying there's a lot that was going on, which was independent, autonomous. The left had a chance, had an opportunity, right? And we need to unpack that moment very closely. That why didn't it translate into something else? A revolutionary crisis. Undoubtedly, I'd say, what does it show? That, sheer numbers that were showing up from the night of 19th July into 20th July clearly show people were coming out in protest on their issues, not on an agenda dictated by the CJP. And that their own autonomous initiative and agency was actually compelling the CJP leaders to continue the sit-in the next day on 21st July. Remember, I told you that the agenda was to stop things with the March to Parliament. Interestingly, these leaders come back on the 21st of July, and they, of course, they marginalize left organizations, they marginalize and disown a lot of the protesters. We find that they were very often, just like the state often was calling the protesters anti-national. Even CJP leaders on record went that, these different people protesting in different parts of the city, we don't own them, they're anti-social elements. So, this is really what was their metal. This is what they're actually made of. You can see their inconsistency and their dubiousness. Nevertheless, the teeming protesters continued to grow. They gathered continuously from, as I said, 19 July into days even after the March to Parliament. And, the important point is precisely this insurrectionary public anger that surfaced across different parts of Delhi and in other parts of the country, indicated an undeniable potential of the movement to snowball into something much bigger. And precisely that is why the ruling dispensation decided to remove Dharmender Pradhan. I mean, he, of course, said he resigned. And so rather than, the CJP, it's really people's own effort and autonomous action, and pressure from below that led to the dispensation, getting that threat, perceiving that threat, this would snowball into something else, and, giving this limited concession, literally a cabinet reshuffle in certain ways. Of course, I've said this earlier, I'll just briefly say it again. The moment is very familiar. It's very familiar and akin to what we saw in Nepal last year in September, when subaltern section of the Gen Z from neighboring areas, areas neighboring Kathmandu and other cities, proceeded to fight a pitched battle on the streets to take on the repressive state in order to challenge power, privilege, position, along with the symbols of wealth and nepotism. And these youth, were coming from the working class. They were the underclass of the cities and neighboring areas. Of course, this working class component in the context of Nepal could never be conflated with the English-speaking, urban middle classes that were also, seen as part of this movement. Tragically, however, the autonomy of their actions, even in Nepal, and their agenda, kept getting marginalized. And this is something that's repeating itself in all these, recent movements. Youth, have been mobilized in significant numbers. So I really end with saying that, definitely participating left organizations gave a definite shape to the movement. But the moment, could not translate into creation of a revolutionary crisis. And many of the left organizations in this movement were actually suffering from tailism. They were not leading per se, they were in fact being led. And there were just some moments where, you can see them gaining some kind of an upper hand. And those that did were very quickly marginalized and pushed out because there was this lack of larger, united, coordination amongst the left forces in this movement. So definitely a more concerted and united coordination of the left could have got, their distinctive agenda to the forefront, and they could have used the possibility, this massive pressure of the masses from below to push through more radical changes. Um, so I'd just like to end here with this and look forward to any questions or comments. Thank you. It took a little bit more than the usual.
No, you're good. Thank you very much, Comrade. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And now we can move to the question and answer session. So the audience can actually directly ask questions. Maybe you can raise your hand or you can use the chat option. Yeah. So we have one question from Yadav. Please go ahead, Comrade.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I had a question regarding the interpretation of the CJI's remarks. He said, quote, there are some people like cockroaches, which translates to in Hindi, कुछ लोग cockroaches जैसे हैं. So by no means this refers to the whole of youngsters. So do you think it's strategic ambiguity? Given this misinterpretation, I would like to quote Joseph Goebbels, lie, lie, lie until it becomes the truth. So do you condemn the founder Abhijit Deepke regarding this?
Thanks, Comrade, for the question. Comrade Maya, you can respond.
See, I really don't see that there was any, ambiguity in what the Chief Justice of India said. And he notoriously made many statements recently during his tenure, which point to the fact that, again, our institutions, state institutions, have literally lost any kind of neutrality or independent functioning. I would just give an example. The same CGI, Chief Justice of India, refused to, grant the right to domestic workers of this country to be placed in minimum wage schedule as an all India level legislative measure, saying that, then literally every household will be stuck in litigation. So this is the kind of, mindset that the Chief Justice of India and many such people in power and authority have, literally amounting to a statement like that in the context of domestic workers is in many ways amounting to, he was outrightly blaming trade unions for the condition of domestic workers, saying that you keep wanting legislation, right, protective legislation, but you are actually the source. Trade unions are actually the source of plight of workers. You make unreasonable demands, right, and you actually exploit the workers yourself. So I'm just saying that don't read a post factum justification of the Chief Justice of India that I didn't actually say this. I was actually saying that he has a terrible track record. Okay, but let me make a larger point here, which is that the CJP leaders like Dipke and all, they picked up on this. They made a meme, right? They picked up on his comments and they made a meme, and it went viral. And today, I think my appeal to everyone here is to draw attention to the fact that to be able to move and translate a certain kind of buzz that is created around a meme into an actual movement, right? That would be in the defense of, that would be in the defense of the actual cockroaches that exist, is important. It's very important to, I would say, see that we've actually seen in the course of what happened in the case of the Cockroach Janata Party. It starts with a satire, right? And the way then they start articulating and intervening, right, and raising certain kind of demands or visions. Then that satire very easily, very quickly translates into a cruel irony, right, where really they don't end up saying or doing much which is transformative.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mahib, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. He clarified his position the next day, saying he specifically meant people who entered law and media spheres based on false degrees, which actually does away from merit. And this is an actual case going on in the High Court. So again, that is the same question, but I would like to hear your answer.
I've already given my assessment and reading of the Chief Justice of India and his recent interventions across different kinds of cases. So I really don't think we need to buy into his argument of justification.
Comrade, you can see that there's a question in the chat box. Bilal is asking, Comrade, you refer to the left in the end. You see that it could be seen during taylism. Could you elaborate on that? I think it's a very good question.
Okay, I'm sorry, my internet may be wavering a little bit, so please let me know if my voice goes. I know my video is going a little on and off.
Sometimes.
But if you can hear me, hear me, just if you can't hear me, please let me know.
Sure.
So thank you for the question. See, when I was referring to the taylism that we saw of the mainstream left, let me clarify here. I'm not clubbing the entire left mobilization and forces. I would say the mainstream left, the parliamentary left, right, which literally I found it very disturbing that Sonam Wangchuk, announced his hunger strike. And in fact, despite a larger meeting, a planning meeting in which it was decided that, it's not a good idea for multiple people to be going on hunger strike. And I know some left organizations even articulated that Sonam Wangchuk should not go on a hunger strike. And there was kind of an uneasy consensus that let him sit on hunger strike, right? But nobody else, organizationally speaking, should. Within hours the next day, one of the mainstream left, parties had 6 of their activists, sitting on hunger strike, right? And it was all a ploy to, gain certain kind of media attention without actually doing a lot of the legwork, right? Hard work that was required in keeping people constantly engaged morning to evening, right? At the protest site, visiting different parts of the city, right? And campaign, use your falling ketone levels, etc., or BP levels to gain sympathy and limelight, right? But the point is, then again, what are you doing to bring limelight to the issue, and how are you doing it in a way that will mobilize more people and get more people to fight on their issues, right? I also feel that some of the left, activists who proclaim to be sitting on hunger strike were not actually honestly doing so. Also, we did see a lot of interesting videos that showed that they were not even there very often when the police sent their doctors team, right, to assess their medical condition, and all of which indicated some very gray areas, and therefore reflecting on opportunism.
Comrade, you are muted.
I was waiting for the next question.
Okay. And there's another question in the chat box. It's Buraj. What should be the left's
I would also like to add, is my voice coming through? I would also like to add, Comrade, that one concern also with the taylism, that we saw of certain mainstream left parties is that, while they adopted the strategy of sitting on the hunger strike, they were actually not drawing attention to the issues of the working class Gen Z. Effectively bring that into the center stage, right? By sitting or adopting on hunger strike and adopting this strategy. So that was also a major concern of many of us, right? With respect to the kind of, taylism that you'll do this, mirror the same thing that, the CJP or CJP supporters are doing. What you do, does it translate into this centering, right, of the issues of the working class majority who are actually getting, mobilized by this movement? But what are you doing through your strategy and tactics to ensure that their demands come into the center, especially when there's a push towards their marginalization? Are you going for just popular kind of.
Correct. There's another question in the chat box by Buraj. What should be the left's approach to the CJP? Criticize openly or issue-based support? You're muted, comrade.
I'm reading the question.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely, I would say that the role of the left would be to constantly pressurize the Cockroach Janata Party to adopt more democratic decision making. They are not the only ones there, right? Who are mobilizing, who are fighting, right? So you can't treat everybody else as your cheerleading squad, right? This is a struggle where people are not coming to be your crowd. They're coming with their own ideology, their own understanding, right? They're bringing working class issues and interests with them. So we can't tolerate, this kind of hierarchy that CJP is going to decide, right? What's the next move and who's going to be the next speaker, etc. Right? So definitely democratic decision making, which was lacking to a significant extent, especially for the initial weeks. Okay, then when we start seeing certain left organizations assert more, right? We do see some kind of shift in the balance, right? But I would say that a joint action committee would be another very important step moving forward, and this would be very, very crucial, a joint action committee, because it would facilitate the left forces to ensure that the agenda of the laboring poor with respect to the laboring poor's educational goals, their concerns, are made part of the action program, are made part of the agenda. So, rather than the CJP being allowed to work like a lion, it has to be, brought on board through a joint action committee. And it has to be told that, you have to work in coordination, right? And you definitely cannot use this tactics of my way or the highway, right? Because this is everybody's struggle, and everybody has taken pellet bullets, and everybody has taken police lathis, okay, while you were sitting and negotiating with the BJ.
Yeah, we have more questions in the chat box, comrade, but let me remind the audience that if you want to ask questions in Sinhala, it's totally okay. I can translate. And I want to encourage the Sri Lankan comrades to ask questions, raise concerns, and join the discussion as well. Let's go to the chat box again. Comrade, do you want to pick up a particular question out of there are three questions?
I'm just reading them.
Okay, okay, take your time. Meanwhile, the audience can even ask questions and comment.
See, I'll take that last question that I can see by AR.
Yeah.
See, there is a very important dialectics that needs to be maintained, right? Between the agendas that you're raising and the action programs, the strategy that you're adopting, right? And that's where I said that, a lot of the mainstream left were failing. See, there are other strategies, right, of mass mobilization, right, of radicalization of people apart from sitting on a hunger strike. It means neighborhood campaigns. It means street agitations, right? There's so many other ways in which you can do it, but not just that, those activities, those efforts will succeed only if you are also organically, and in a very clear-cut, assertive way, not in some kind of absent-mindedness, but in a very concrete way, also raising the issues constantly of the margins, the issues, the educational concerns of the working class youth. So both have to go together. And when I say tailism of a lot of left, and I was critical of the hunger strike strategy of some of them, it's precisely because both compromised. The demands of the working class youth, right? You were only fleetingly mentioning them in some of your media bites, right? And your strategy itself of sitting on a long drawn out hunger strike, right? When you could have done many other things to bring the issues, the real issues of the people to the forefront, and to mobilize with those very same people on their issues more effectively.
Maybe you can pick up one more question from the chat box.
See, I'm not much of a fan of either on these people who've been mentioned, Rasool, Ilyas, Arundhati, etc. Please try to understand that, where many of us are coming from. It's about, bringing the issues of the majority, okay, into the center, into the forefront of the movement, right? And in many ways, all these people, Simi activists and all that, we don't necessarily see them in aiding that cause. See, the main thing is, what are you doing on a concrete level to ensure that, rather than a narrow demand, right, or reformist, cosmetic kind of concessions that some players in the movement are asking, how do you ensure that those get dislodged, right? And I think my critique comes from there, that is where the biggest failure was of what we've seen in the last 2 months or so.
Anyone else? Questions? You can directly ask from Maya. Anybody? So, Comrade, while the audience maybe think about the question, maybe articulate the question, maybe I can ask something that I was a little curious about. I think it also emerged from. Do you want to respond to one of the questions before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep scrolling. Actually, there's some of the comments I can't read all of them. Maybe it's something with my screen, but I've just got to the last one. Yeah.
Okay.
So, see, I would say what is this sense of law, right, that you're working with, right, and justifying, right, and saying that this law, how it's a sacrosanct piece of law, and how does one see protesters who are breaking that law? Isn't there a problem if one justifies it? My point is, there's so much that is going on in front of our eyes in the name of law, rule of law, and in the name of, what I call electoral representative politics, right? So the regime that makes this law and passes so many, let's say, regressive measures using those laws, including filing numerous FIRs against protesters in recent days. Let's remember that very power, that very authority also comes from very, very questionable, grounds. Just because you have won an election, and remember, an election in a model of elections which is deeply problematic. We are a country that follows what is known as the first past the post election model. Okay, and literally what we see is electoral autocracy, not democracy, function in India. Most of the general elections and even many provincial level elections in this country since the early 50s, the majority are actually against the government in power. They don't want the government to be returned. But governments with 30% vote share, 35% vote share, this one that is currently ruling for the last decade, has not vote share more than 40% at any point of time, right? And still they get to rule over all those people who actually did not vote for them. They get to rule over the large majority of defeated people and take decisions. I would say our country is not a democracy, it's a cabinetocracy. It's a closed cabinet of a few ministers who decide the law, who decide the policy. It is a well-known fact that the ruling bloc, be it the individual ruling party or opposition, even if you get elected as an opposition MP, the reality is that you're still not part of the important, decision-making level institutions within the parliament, like the cabinet, etc. Right? And we know that many opposition politicians in the in the in the legislature often been expelled from the concerns about laws that are being made and amendments to the laws, right? So I really think that we need to remember that even those who make the law for this country at present are not actually true representatives of the vast majority. They're ruling literally by an electoral autocracy.
Thanks, Comrade, for that response. I think Mahib has got another question. Mahib, you can speak.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
You are now.
I have a follow-up question. The
Yeah.
IPC was made during the British times. If not law, what should dictate morality in this country?
Hmm.
Lastly, because morality is very subjective. Like my morality might differ from yours. So it is law that is concrete, which should be uninterpretational and should dictate the morality.
Maya, do you want to respond? Can you hear, Comrade? Maya?
Comrade, I would just say that it's not a question of morality, okay, morals here, right? It's about concrete interests. In whose interests, right, are policies made, in whose interests are laws made, in whose interests are laws amended, right? Please remember, one is talking about the concrete interests, not questions of morality. The concrete interests of that vast majority of this country that makes everything from a simple needle that you use to sew, right, to a fighter jet, right? And that large section that's hard work, that's labor runs this economy. Underpaid labor runs this economy, right? What is it getting back from the economy, from this political system, right? That is where I want to bring and draw our attention, that when this section is pushing from below for its issues, for its demands, right? What are we seeing? At one level, we're seeing a co-option, right, of the momentum by a section of middle class, right? And we're seeing a certain lack or inability of the left forces to galvanize those opportunities thrown up, right, by the struggling working class on their concrete issues, right, on their material conditions. They fail to translate it into something that it actually can be, which is a radical overhauling of the system of law, the system of governance that you're so used to, right, to your notions of rights, to your notions of wrong.
Thank you. There's one question. I think this is by Prithviraj. What would you suggest as the way ahead? What should be the way forward?
See, the CJP, this is Buraj's question I'm responding. See, the CJP, they always, have this upper hand, this edge when it comes to the digital technology and how it can be used. But the thing is that we still, the radical forces that understand and are committed to the needs and demands of the struggling people, we, of course, can do other things. We can lead those movements that have long existed of government school children, of youth, of workers, of all the struggling sections of society that are demanding accountable governments, are demanding their basic rights. Right? So it means street agitation. If they are good at the digital, if they are good and they're going to score brownie points there, they may even become another electoral political party. Who knows? We're still studying the possibilities of that. We have to, obviously challenge that. We have to meet that challenge with our own, mass politics of going to the people, of going to them, of galvanizing them continuously.
Okay. Any other questions?
We also have to remember, if we don't do that, who will? If we don't galvanize, right, the masses through our politics of mass politics, right, not merely electoral but main ground level work, then who will? Their issues will never come into the center stage of the movement.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So, Mama, Mama translate Karan. I will translate. Comrade, he's asking the question in Sinhala, so I will try to translate that into English.
අපි ලංකාවේ මහජනරගලේදී දැක්ක ප්‍රධානම කාරණයක් තමයි මේ කම්කරු පන්තියේ සංවිධානාත්මක මැදිහත් වීම ඒකාබද්ධතාවයන් තිබුණේ නැති එක. එතකොට පහුගිය කාල පරිච්ඡේදෙම බංග්ලාදේශයේ නේපාලේ අරගලවලත් අඩු වැඩි වශයෙන් මේ තත්ත්වය තිබ්බා. දැන් ඉන්දියානු වමේ ව්‍යාපාරය මේ අරගලේ කියවගත්තේ කොහොමද? එක. දෙවෙනි කාරණේ එකෙන් පන්ති දේශපාලනයට බලපෑමක් වෙලා තියෙනවද? සහ ඉන්දියානු කම්කරු පන්ති සංවිධානාත්මක මේකත් එක්ක ඒකාබද්ධතාවය සඳහා වැඩ කරාද? සහ CJP එක සිස්ටම් එකේ අරුබුදයක් විදිහටද මේ ප්‍රශ්න වටහාගෙන මැදිහත් වෙන්නේ. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.
All right. That's one of our comrades, Maya, and he's asking three questions basically. One is actually how the left in India read the entire situation. For example, the uprising of the CJP, how the left read the situation. Second one is did the left in India actually work with the working class people? Because he took the example from Sri Lanka, where actually the people's movement, Aragalaya, did not have any strong support from the working class movement in Sri Lanka. So he's asking the question, did the left actually try to work with the working class people in this situation? That's the second question. Third one is actually he raised, I think you kind of responded that, you mentioned that in your speech, the how actually CJP sort of manipulated the situation, and CJP sort of did not understand the system very well. So he was asking the question whether the CJP was able to understand the system, the capitalist system in India. So there are three questions. It's up to you to respond. You're muted, Comrade.
See, I would respond to the clubbing the questions. See, the left cannot, in any ways end up adopting methods of struggle or strategy that more or less resemble or mirror what even sometimes, right-wing organizations end up doing. The point is, the left is already working amongst struggling masses. It has its presence, and there's a history to that legacy. Despite all ups and downs, the left continues to have presence amongst peasants, landless labor, Adivasis, lower caste groups, youth, etc. Right? The point is, issues keep coming up, conjectures keep coming up, right? And when they do, the left responding to them or engaging with them cannot let go of its class politics, which is what is often happening, right? We have to invade present day Gen Z movements and bring in the working class Gen Z's issues within those. We have to anchor those as the priority of the Gen Z movement, because they are the vast majority. It is the working class, it is the subaltern that's the vast majority. So the left has to, engage with movements, not in any way diluting class politics. You have to keep bringing class back, into our deliberations, into our everyday strategy, and to some extent in the so-called cockroach movement, we saw those tussles. I saw certain non-parliamentary left, non-mainstream left doing that, right? So I would say that is where we need to, understand our anchorage, and what we need to do is to ensure that we make sure the working class issues are there in every movement, in the center of them. It also means that we're constantly expanding our presence, our influence. We need to, a movement like this cannot be allowed to just, now slide out of our hands. We may not have been able to galvanize things during June, July, right? But now it means that we know how agitated, we know how much, potential of upsurge is there amongst people. It means that you decenter Delhi Jantar Mantar, go to your areas of work, your working class neighborhoods, slums, industrial areas. That's where you regroup. That's where you galvanize people. And education and employment is one of the key things, along with rising costs of living, that people are actually waiting for a signal. And literally things have reached a desperate level, which is why I said from January of this year, we've seen continuous, strike waves of underpaid, workers. And where is it coming from? So people want to fight, and the left need to galvanize that. They are doing it, but very often by compromising on class issues, which they should.
May I translate that into Sinhala, comrade? Give me like a minute. Vijay Saudara,
I'm not sure if I clarified what I meant last point about, we need to decenter Delhi, the Jantar Mantar. What I'm basically saying, the designated protest site, we need to, move away from that and spread out into, as I said, where the people are, into neighborhoods, so that's
yeah. Let me quickly translate your response. විජන් සෞදරේ කියන්නේ විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ වාමාංශිකයන්ගේ කාර්යභාරය නැත්තම් වාම පක්ෂවල කාර්යභාරය විය යුත්තේ මේ වගේ තත්ත්වයකදී පැහැදිලිව පන්ති දේශපාලනය නැවත මේ ආඛ්‍යානය ඇතුළට ගේන එක, මේ ක්‍රියාවලිය ඇතුළට ගේන එක. විශේෂයෙන් මෙයා කියන ප්‍රධාන කාරණයක් තමයි ඕනම මූවමන්ට් එකක් ඇතුළට එයා පාවිච්චි කරන වචනේ ඉන්වේඩින් කියන එක. ඒක ඇතුළට ආක්‍රමණශීලීව, උපක්‍රමශීලීව මැදිහත් වීම කියන එක අත්‍යවශ්‍ය දෙයක්. ඒක වමේ උපක්‍රමයක් විදිහට තිබිය යුතුයි කියන එක තමයි ඇය කියන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි ඇය ඊටම කෙටියෙන් මම මේ එයාගේ අදහස මේ වට පැහැදිලි කරන්නේ. අනිත් කාරණේ තමයි එයා කීප ප්‍රධානම දේ තමයි කිසිදු ඕනම කොන්දේසියක් යටතේ වමට වගකීමක් තියෙනවා පන්ති දේශපාලනය කියන එක, පන්ති කියන එක නැවත දේශපාලනයේ මූලධර්ම ඇතුළට අරගෙන එන්න. ඒ හරහා තමයි මේ මූලධර්මයේ අකියන විදිහට මේ මූලධර්මයේ කිසිසේත්ම අව탁සීරු කරන්න හෝ ඒක ඉවත් කරන්න හැකියාවක් නැහැ. නමුත් එකතු කරන අවසානයේ යම් කාරණයක් ඒක තමයි බොහෝ විට වමේ මැදිහත් වීම කියන එකෙන් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කොම්ප්‍රොමයිසේෂන්. යම් දෙයක් අපි කියන කොම්ප්‍රොමයිස් කරනවා. ඒක ඒ අපේ මූලධර්ම වලට පිටින් ගිහිල්ලා ඒක නැවත නැවත කොම්ප්‍රොමයිස් කිරීම තමයි බොහෝ විට වාමපක්ෂ වලින් ඒ කියන විදිහට සාම්ප්‍රදායික වාමපක්ෂ වලින් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි පැහැදිලි කරා පාර්ලිමේන්තු නොවන වාමාංශය මේ වෙලාවේදී යම්කිසි රැඩිකල් කාර්යභාරයක් ඉෂ්ට කරා ඒක අගය කරන එක විදිහක ඒ වගේම තමයි පෙන්වා දෙන කාරණයක් තමයි පාර්ලිමේන්තු වාමාංශය හැරුණුකොට වෙනත් වාම පක්ෂවලට කණ්ඩායම් වලට විශාල වගකීමක් මේ වගේ තත්ත්වයන් වලදී තියෙනවා කියන කාරණය. අවසාන වශයෙන් පැහැදිලි කරා විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ අරගල අපි දන්නවා තිබුණේ ජන්තර් මන්තර් කියන ඒ එතන ස්මාරකයක්. ඒ වගේම තමයි මේක දිල්ලිය පදනම් කරගත්ත අරගලයක්. නමුත් පැහැදිලි කරන කාරණේ තමයි එහෙම අරගලවල කේන්ද්‍රයක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් වමේ කාර්යභාරය තමයි මේක ස්ප්‍රෙඩ් කිරීම නැත්නම් මේක ව්‍යාප්ත කිරීම කියන එක තමයි මායාජෝන්ගේ ප්‍රතිචාරය බවට පත් වුණේ. මම දන්නේ නැහැ වාගේ ප්‍රශ්න ඔක්කොටම උත්තර ලැබුණද කියලා. නමුත් අපි ඉස්සරහට යමු අනිකුත් දේවල් එක්ක. So that's a brief translation of Maya's response to Regindra's question. Do you want to take up one more question from the chat box?
Yes, I just read one that's there by Aditya Raj.
Great.
An important question. Thank you for posing it. I'm summing up, it's a summation. My response is summation of what I have already shared.
Yeah.
See, the point is that the left, the interest of, coming across somewhere as, having, to some kind of angst for middle class respectability, right? And getting accepted by that articulate, educated section of the middle class. The left really, in all these movements, cannot subject the working class issues to being sidelined. It's very important that the left expand the hegemony of the working masses, right? And not get hegemonized by middle class, issues and articulation. So what one saw in the so-called Cockroach Janta, party and the Cockroach movement is that to a large extent, the mainstream left was also, limited to this singular issue of that paper leaks, right? And how to curtail paper leaks in the country, right? Until Dharmendra Pradhan doesn't, resign. The point is that, where did the articulation and the mobilization on something as crucial as, the common school, where was that demand? Why wasn't it forcefully, there in the movement? See, when you're balancing in a movement like, the Cockroach movement, saying popular, front kind of situations, when you're balancing, different forces, right? Doesn't mean that you end up compromising the working class demands, right? Now, common school is a very, very, very crucial demand of the laboring poor, peasants, landless labor, the working class, right? And it's a great equalizer. That why should a country's youth and children go to two separate schools? Because there starts the journey of further, inequality. Because a bad school education, an incomplete school education, a school education where most, and I'm giving you some startling figures, in India, right, the number of young children who enroll in class 1, so that's around 6 years of age, right? You look at that data, that figure, and you look at the number who pass out in class 12, that means finish schooling, the number has dropped 50%. You have to plug a leaking education system that translates into moving forward that translates into further intensification of inequalities, inherited, acquired, and new ones, right? So where was that demand of the working class, that everybody has a right to the same education, everybody has a right to finish an education, because that enables them to even think of a different way of life than what they've been born in. And that was hardly very much a demand that was coming out, right, from the Jantar Mantar protest side. It was largely about, so many NEET aspirants have been betrayed, the government is not sacking this person. So I mean, it was a very, very unfortunate, I would say, putting down, making subordinate the real issues that counted for the majority. I mean, most of these young people in our country are languishing. They will never even immediately even have it in their radar that they want to sit for the NEET, exam, the Indian Civil Service exam, etc. In fact, many times, what we call the Godi media, okay, the corporate media supportive of the government, used to come and heckle protesters with these kind of questions like, do you know the full form of NEET, right? Are you a NEET aspirant? And it's very interesting to watch so many young government school students had come, so many young people saying, we don't care what the full form of NEET is. I'm here because I have just found out my school is being closed next month and I won't have a school to go to. I am here because in government hospitals in Delhi, the capital city, there's such a shortage of doctors, right? That there are 3 patients on one bed. There's no doctor coming for hours, right? So this is a larger health come education, concern that was bringing people out.
Thanks, Comrade, for that response. Maybe we can entertain 2 more questions and wrap up the session. Mahib, do you have any question? Your hand is up.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I actually had a follow-up question regarding the IPC section 144. It is a section that predates the Indian independence, and it was enshrined in the Indian Constitution. In the first edition of the Indian Constitution without any amendments under Article 246. So, would you say that the makers of the Constitution, including Bhimrao Ambedkar, were among those forces that helped the people to currently stay in power?
Comrade, you can respond. You're muted, Comrade. Maya? Maya, can you hear us? You're muted.
Sorry, Comrade.
Yeah.
See, I think Mahip likes to conflate issues and also is asking certain things which are kind of out of context and don't help the discussion much. But nevertheless, let me be very brief here. See, the Indian Constitution, historically speaking, right, was framed by an assembly, right, that was actually brought, into a position of authority to make the constitution based on a property-based franchise, and that there was a colonial era legacy, and the election that was held in 1946 was clearly a property-based one, and it's not any kind of a coincidence, but it's a well-known fact and an uncomfortable truth that a large part of the Indian Constitution is lifted from the Government of India Act 1935, again a colonial era, law. So that means that and the the Constituent Assembly was comprising of a large number of um, members, right, who were elected as per property-based franchise in British India, right? And when I say property-based franchise in British India, this means that just about 7%, of Indians in British India and British India alone actually, had this opportunity to elect someone, a representative, to be part of this very important process, foundational process of a future roadmap for this country, a constitutional roadmap for this country. Outside British India, which is the largest share of landmass, was princely India. Okay, and the Indian princes were given this, absolutely outrageous privilege of nominating 93 members to the Constituent Assembly that framed this constitution. And these are areas, princely states, where there were huge people's movements being fought against these rulers, the entrenched system of feudal exploitation, inequality. But none of the people's leaders were sent or asked to be part of the historic process of constitution framing. So almost from the very beginning, many have, distanced themselves from that process. So it's not historically, unusual to see that in this process, many pieces and provisions, the most draconic ones from the colonial era legislation, legal framework, have carried forward in the independent country, India's constitution. Right? I would say that an interesting example that I would just like to end with is, again, linking up to the question of education. Most of the crucial, because of this particular composition of the Constituent Assembly that framed our founding, document, the Constitution, you'll find that an important issue like education, which was, of course, something that was very, very crucial aspiration of Indians, right? That demand and several other aspirations and demands of movements in the late colonial period were strategically not placed in the fundamental rights section of the Indian Constitution. In fact, in the case of education, right, the right to education was moved from fundamental rights to the section, ironically, and it's very ironic, the only non-justiciable section in a legal document, which is the directive principles, right? And that's a section we know that conveniently allows the Indian state to postpone intervention, right, lawmaking on all the crucial issues that actually could have been a game changer for the subaltern working masses of this country. That included education, that included rights to equal wage and living wage, and many other things.
All right. Maybe we can get just one more question, and any Sri Lankan comrades who want to direct their questions or comment on the things? Maybe, Comrade, I can ask just one question. You mentioned that as a sort of a solution, or maybe you were thinking about if the left was actually united and have a sort of a defense mechanism, have a sort of a centered power, uh, the movement can be the future of the movement can be something different. Because I'm asking this question because, at least for me, that such populist movements and Gen Z movements are going to be something very common in our future politics. And how do you read the situation? How do you read the possibilities in the Indian context where the left can be sort of united, the left can become a real alternative against the reactionary and populist movements? You're muted, Comrade.
See, there is definitely much wanting in terms of the leadership of many of the mainstream left parties. And so it's really, the rank and file of these organizations that need to, take the initiative. And, I'd say that it's when I made that point earlier in the discussion about it, coordination, greater unity, that's one level, that as a bulwark against, something like the Cockroach Janata Party that has an edge over, you in terms of social media, etc. That would have been an important way of reining CJP in, right? And working around action programs that would have reflected, as I keep saying, the real agenda of the working class, and also ensured more democratic functioning, right, of all participating organizations. But the second level of the argument is within the left. There is no homogeneous left. Within the left, there is, a huge spectrum, and as I just said, most mainstream parliamentary left parties and their leadership are bankrupt, ideologically bankrupt. So it's really, the left from below, the alternate independent left, the rank and file of mainstream parliamentary left, those forces, right? If they galvanize, if they, as I also said earlier, decenter, right, the protest site, okay, which can so easily be cracked down upon, and we saw it being cracked down upon on the 20th of July. After which, there's literally been just 4-5 days of, reclaiming. Importantly, we are the alternative left, and then again, there's been like a stasis. Right, it's very important for that bottoms-up left, to grab the moment, and this would mean, taking the campaign on education, on employment to the people, to working class neighborhoods, right, to government schools, right, to industrial belts, to rural India. That is really, I think, very, very important. And the coordination, of course, a coordination of the rank and file would be possible. I would say a committee, a coordination committee of rank and file, right, to facilitate, to give shape to this, bottoms up left intervention would be very, very crucial. And that will be a committee through which, we'll see other things then becoming possible, like local people's committees, struggling committees materializing, right? Slowly, a more advanced form, people's councils materializing, right? So this is really, the trajectory that one is implying now needs to be the strategy.
Thank you, Comrade. Any other question? Maybe just one last question we can entertain. All right. Comrade, do you want to add something before winding up the session? Aditya has just one question. How do we then deal with diverse voices and stances in the left? Aditya Raj, he posted a question.
Objective interest is basically the measurement, Aditya Raj. Who's been able to, in the left, really uphold the objective interests of the working class, right? Who's been able to establish that hegemony? That's really the way in which you assess and make sense of the diversity. I would say reinvent the left, Kalpa. That's my answer to your question. The left cannot be just some kind of a formulaic, mirror image of the right. It is really the initiative from below and giving strength and direction and momentum to that. As I keep saying, the terms of left. That is what we need to use for the reinvention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Comrade. I think this is the right time to wind up the session.
And of course, as I said earlier, bring class back. That's what I meant. Bring class back into our deliberations.
Thank you. All right. So I think we should wind up. Before winding up, I should thank our dear comrade Maya for accepting our invitation and sharing her experience, thoughts about the cockroach movement and Indian politics and the situation of the left in India, and also responding to a wide spectrum of questions posted in the chat box and posted directed by the comrades. So I thank you very much, and we are looking forward to have you once again to discuss another important topic related to South Asia, Sri Lanka, and world politics. And also, I thank very much the participants and sharing this moment with us. And also, I thank everyone for asking questions, important questions, and posting comments. And we are looking forward to, as the Marx School, we are looking forward to have you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalpa. Thank you to other comrades at Marx Club. Sorry if my network gave issues in between.
Not at all.
My laptop's also giving trouble. So
Don't worry. It was perfect. Thank you very much.
We can exit now?
Yes, you can. Thank you.
So what was your sense, Kalpa? I mean, how many comrades were able to join, according to you, from Sri Lanka?
I think we had around 45 comrades, but the majority is actually surprisingly from India. Not surprisingly, but from India. We had
Because people are reviewing, actually. That's why. We're all in the midst of reviewing.
Yes,
so
indeed. Yeah, actually, we wanted to have you because we wanted to sort of have a voice from inside. Because we can remember that you are so keen towards understanding what is going on in Sri Lanka in 2022, and we thought that you learn something. Absolutely, you learn something from Sri Lankan experience, and we wanted to hear what's really going on, because the mainstream media tells a lot of lies, and the Sri Lankan media is not so different from those medias. So we had a good amount of participants. Maybe as a suggestion, Comrade, can we turn this into an article? Maybe we can do that. We can, based on your speech and comments, we can compose, as a Marx School, we can compose an article and then translate it into Sinhala.
That sounds good. I'll discuss it, because we're writing a series, actually. So according to how we pace ourselves, our team, I can then be in touch with you how to work this one